Hello guys and welcome to another video. This time I'll try to reproduce this scene from an old classic movie, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. So as always, let's jump right to the process. Again, I've started with the frame. This time I have added some supports for the rocks on the sides, because the center area will be filled with LED lights and resin. Once the frame was finished, I have painted the wood and drilled the holes for all the cables. At last I have sprayed the wood with glossy varnish, and to make my modeling a little bit easier in next stage, I have also added a fake floor. To save some weight and time, I have made the basic modeling from extruded polystyrene. I've prepared all the pieces for the basic shape, and I've also used a hot wire for fine modeling before I've glued everything together, because the glue is pretty hard for the hot wire. Next, every piece was glued to the frame, and I also left some space for the rocks between the frame and polystyrene. At last I've made the opening for the tunnel, and I was able to move to the next step to prepare some rocks. To achieve a natural look for a project of this scale, I was using multiple different molds. Using these molds is really simple. I've just mixed the gyps with the water to a consistency liquid enough to fill the molds and let it dry for some hours. This consistency was a little bit more dense than required, but it was still okay to make the job done. After some hours, I was able to remove the rocks from the molds. I knew that I will need many of them, but I was pretty astonished that I have needed triple amount of the rocks you can see in this picture. Before the rocks were glued to the base, I had to adjust all of them so they will fit together as good as possible. This was basically a process of trial and error for each individual rock. I had also some larger gaps between the rocks, but I was also able to easily fill these with the gyps. I've also made some details using some real rocks and sand. And as always, to bond everything together, I have used Mod Podge diluted with water in 3:1 ratio. In this stage, based on the models, I also prepared the holes for the cables. The main modeling part was finally finished, and I've moved on to the painting. The rocks in the film were grey and pretty dark, so I have used 2 tones of grey color diluted with water to wash consistency. As a last step, I have painted everything with black wash, which was diluted with water even more than the previous 2 washes. The highlights were built in 2 stages using dry brushing. In the first stage, I've dry brushed everything with light grey color, and in the second stage I've picked only the tips of the rocks and dry brushed them with almost pure white color. I wanted to make my life easier here, and I've done the wall lights using Christmas LED lights, which can be bought almost everywhere. To achieve even more glowy effect from the lava, I airbrushed the rocks from the bottom using red and orange color. As a base for the resin, I've used a plexiglass. I've also used a sandpaper here, so the lights below it won't be that visible. I have glued the plexiglass to the bottom and also filled all the gaps, because the last thing you want is a leaking resin. For the glow effect, I was using LED strips. I have soldered everything together. Put the lights in place, but I assume that these lights won't be enough, so I've doubled the amount of them. And at last I have changed the color of the lights to orange. Now was the time to pour out the resin. I was doing this in multiple steps to check the color of the lava and also to check whether the lights are still visible or not. I've ended with 3 layers and different colors of resin. I've also tried to make the resin with 2 colors, but they have blended completely together. Luckily, it wasn't a problem in the end. At last I've made some texture details and the lava was finished. As always, I had to find some free 3D models, adjust them to fit into my scene and print them using resin 3D printer. Then I've drilled the holes for the cables and painted all the miniatures as usual. I also made some weathering here to achieve an old and used look for the cards. Of course, the miniatures required also some freehand details. Once the miniatures were ready, I've measured the required distance between the rails. Then I've prepared some woods and nails so I can attach the rails to the exact position as needed for my miniatures. I have used these small SMD lights for the lights used on the cards. Again, I've soldered everything together and I've tried to hit the cables as much as I can. Some weathering had to be done also to these rails, so I've destroyed some of these connections and I've painted them the same as the card. Dry brushing was used again to raise some further details. After the painting was finished, I was able to glue everything to its place, paint the last visible cables and position the minis. I made also a finishing touch using airbrush to enhance the glow effect from the lava. The rails with the miniatures were finished and I was able to attach them to the diorama. As a last step for this project, I had to add some wooden supports for the rails. I've tried to do some weathering also to the wood to make it look old. After gluing the last pieces, the diorama was finished and I hope that you will enjoy it as much as I do. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and also hit the bell so you won't miss my next builds. See you next time.